Against the backdrop of 72 representative people groups sketched in Genesis 10, God promises in Genesis 12 that he will make one man into a great nation. God will restore the blessing of creation to his chosen nation, and they in turn restore blessing to all the nations. This is God's remarkable promise to Abraham and his plan for redemptive history. It is difficult to overestimate the significance of this promise for the remainder of the biblical story. Paul even says 2,000 years later in Galatians 3:8 that in this promise God preaches the gospel. This promise is the central theme of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. But it moves beyond these books to offer a blueprint for the redemptive history of the whole world. God promises 3 things to Abraham: people, land, and blessing. God will make Abraham into a great people, give them a land, and restore to them the blessing of creation lost in the fall. God intends that through Abraham and his family to deal with the problem of sin, the sin of Adam, and to reverse the curse. However, to stop at these 3 gifts promised to Abraham of people, land, and blessing would be to miss an essential element in the promise. His goal in giving all of this to Abraham is ultimately to include all nations into the restoration of the whole earth. The promise made to Abraham can be diagrammed like this. Abraham and his descendants are blessed so that they might be a blessing to others. They are intended to be a river of God's grace to the world and not a cistern for their own selfish benefit. But another diagram helps us to see the scope and significance of this promise. The Abrahamic promise looks back to the original creation, the beginning of the story, and forward to the end, to the new creation, the end of the story. The promise looks back. Adam and Eve, who are a people, had been placed in a garden, the place in which they are to enjoy God's creational blessing. God promises to restore Israel to what Adam and Eve failed to be, a people, to give them the land which Eden failed to be, the place, and to restore creation's blessing that they had forfeited in their rebellion. The promise looks forward. The goal is that all nations would be incorporated into Israel, a people, and that the whole creation might be a restored Eden, the place, and that all nations and the whole of the creation might be restored to the blessing it was meant to enjoy in creation. In Genesis 15, this Abrahamic promise is given powerful reinforcement in the covenant, a binding agreement between 2 parties which could be broken only by death. God promises Abraham he will be given a son, the literal beginning of that great and numerous nation promised. Further, God promises that he will give this nation a land of their own. Then God walks alone between the split carcasses of the sacrificial animals in a covenant ceremony well known to Abraham, a sign that whoever walks through these pieces invokes death on himself if he should fail to keep his word. This covenant promise now becomes the center of the stories of the patriarchs of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The promise of a people, a land, and blessed to be a blessing is repeated to Abraham, then to Isaac, and at last to Jacob. Many barriers to the fulfillment of these promises arise through the narratives of Genesis. The patriarchs are impotent and their wives are barren. Their wives are seized by the harems of foreign kings. The patriarchal families wander without a homeland. There is strife between the patriarchs and the surrounding nations, and there are natural disasters that threaten them. But in all of this, God reveals himself as El Shaddai, God Almighty, the name that dominates this narrative. His name describes his power to overcome any obstacle that would prevent him from keeping his promise. Genesis ends with Abraham's family comprised of about 100 people, and they now dwell in Egypt, where God has sovereignly brought them to save them from famine. It is a small beginning, but the story continues in Exodus.